Hello everyone and welcome to section 4 Advanced Layers and Curves with Skin and Enhancing Colors in Photoshop. The name of the first video of this section is Discovering Dynamic Range and Film Curves in Photoshop. The first thing that I'm going to explain in this video is actually how to apply and adjust dynamic range in your Photoshop projects. So the dynamic range is the difference between the darkest and the lightest areas of your photo. It doesn't only apply to photography, and increasing dynamic range make photos to look more alike to what the eye sees in real life. So I'm going to demonstrate you how to do this effect. And the second thing that I'm going to explain and demonstrate in this video is how to apply Fumefx to your photo in Photoshop in order to make it look like it was taken with the film camera in the vintage period of photography. So first of all, I'm going to open Photoshop, and you can see here I have two images open. The first image is with this lady laying on the ground, and the second image is with this texture that I'm going to apply later in order to create the film effect to the first image. But first of all, let's take a look at the first image. What is the dynamic range? Actually, in order to concrete the dynamic range of your photo, in order to see what is it, you will first of all need to make sure that you have the histogram visible in your Photoshop interface. So you are clicking on the window menu and finding histogram, clicking on it, and this is your dynamic range in your Photoshop project. So basically these white curves here symbolize the darkest areas of the image on the left side, the brightest areas of the image on the right side, and also the midtones that are in the middle of this histogram. So you can see that the brightest and the darkest pixels here are not touching the high end of this histogram. So the high end, the left and the right high ends are symbolizing the capacity of the screen to process colors of your image, and if you want to have full capacity of colors in your image, you will need to make sure that you are touching the left end and the right end of this histogram. So these places here are actually now symbolizing the borders of the dynamic range of the image, and if you overjump them, you're going to clip the image. So what does it mean to clip the image? It means that if you go beyond these widest pixels here on the opened image, you're going to have a solid white color, and the details of the photo are going to get lost. And it is the same for the black tones. If you jump over this border here, you're going to have a solid black color, so the details of this area that are here in this blank space are going to be in solid black, and the details are going to be lost. So I'm going to demonstrate you what does it mean to clip an image. So in order to do this, I'm going to add an adjustment layer that is hue and saturation. And if I increase the lightness of the image, let's say to this level here, I think it's enough, you will see how the histogram has changed. So we are just jumping over this border of the original image, and if I select the color with the eyedropper, you can see that the color is very similar to white. It's exactly white. It's 6Fs, so we are losing the details in the area that I have selected. And of course, we don't want to lose any details from our images. And if I, of course, decrease the lightness to this level, let's say, you can see that the whole dynamic range is actually jumping over this border of the original image. And if I select this color, for example, I need to make sure that I'm selecting from the adjustment layer. You can see that it's almost total black color. It's 0D, 0C, 0A, so it's almost losing all the details in this area. So I'm just going to delete this layer and show you how to adjust the dynamic range of this image. So in order to adjust the dynamic range, you're going to add again an adjustment layer, but it is going to be curves. So what does the dynamic range has to do with the curves in Photoshop? You will see right now. So you can see that the curves here are actually pretty the same like the histogram is showing. So you can see here, this is the blank space between the total black and our darkest tones of the image, and this is here the border between the total white and the lightest points of our object. So in order to make better dynamic range and to use the full capacity of the screen, you're going to move both black and white to the middle of the image, but you're just not going to drag it this way. You're going to first of all hold Alt or Option key and drag it until the moment you see any details appearing on the image. You can see now how details are appearing, and I think this is the moment when you should stop. Okay, let's stop here. You can see now on the histogram, we are now having pixels that are touching the left-hand part of the histogram, so it means that we're using the full capacity of the screen on our dark points on the image. And I'm going to do pretty the same with the white, holding Alt or Option key and dragging to the left until you see any details appearing. I think that's enough, or just move it a little bit more to the left. And that's it. So we have just adjusted our dynamic range of this image. You can see that the darkest points are hitting the high end of the darkest points on our screen capacity, and the lightest points are doing the same, but with the brightest high end of this histogram. So you can see the difference. This is the original image, and this is the image with the corrected dynamic range. So you can see that more and more colors are appearing, and it looks much better than before. So this is with the dynamic range adjusted, and this is without adjusted dynamic range. So it looks a little bit faded here, but after the adjustment it looks totally fine, and we're using the full capacity of the screen in this case. So the next thing that I'm going to do, as I told you in the presentation, is applying a Fumefx to this image, and after that I'm going to show you how to use the Hdr Toning in Photoshop in order to make high dynamic range adjustments to your projects. But first of all, let's open the second image, which is Effect, selecting the whole image, Ctrl and C in order to copy, Ctrl and V in order to paste it here. I'm going to transform it and make it bigger in order to fit the whole image, and maybe I will need to rotate it because it's now horizontal. Rotating it to this level, and again stretching it to the end of the image. Pressing enter, and I will need to transform it a little bit more because I'm not hitting all the borders of the image, and now we're ready. So you can see here, this is our layer 1, which is going to be the film curve effect that we're going to achieve in this project. If I make it invisible, you can see the original image, and this is with the overlaid layer 1. So the thing that I'm going to do is using blending modes. In some of the previous videos I have explained how to apply blending modes in different situations in Photoshop, and here I'm going to use the screen blending mode. The screen blending mode belongs to the third family of blending modes, which is exactly lighten, screen, color dodge, and so on and so on. So it means that if I apply a blending mode from this family, it is going to remove the darkest points, the darkest areas of the image, and going to let the white bars stay as an overlay to the layer 0 to our background layer. So I'm going to hit screen, and now it has applied this film texture, and the photo now looks like it has been taken with an old camera. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is double clicking on layer 1 and applying some layer styles. So I'm going to use gradient overlay, making sure that you have selected it, moving this panel a little bit. And I'm going to change the gradient, let's say to this one, in order to have something like a burning effect. I'm going to use the linear style. You can of course use angle, reflection, or diamond, but I think the linear style is working fine for us. I'm going to reverse it, and after that decreasing the opacity of it. Let's decrease it to this level and maybe scale it a little bit more. After that, of course, I can change the angle of the gradient overlay. I can of course change the style if I want to achieve other results, but I think that linear style works very good for us. So maybe decrease the opacity a little bit more, let's say to 20%, hitting OK, and now we have a more vintage look of the image that we have opened. And the next thing that I'm going to do is applying a gradient map. So after applying this gradient map, I'm just going to select the gradient that is going to be, let's say this one again with the burning, and I'm just going to select the overlay blending mode. After that, you can see that we have it now, the whole image burned, and I'm going to decrease the fill of it, let's say to like 7 or 12%. I think it works fine for us now. And that's basically the way you're going to make the photos more vintage, and like it has burned a little bit from the film that you have used while shooting this image, because when you're shooting with film, you never know what is going to be the final result until you see it printed and visualized. So the final thing that I'm going to do with this image is the HDR tuning. So in order to do an HDR tuning, you will need to have a flattened image. So it means that we will need to flatten all the layers that we have made and opened so far. So I'm going to select them all, holding Shift, right key, and finding somewhere flatten image, pressing on it. And now it has created the background layer that is a combination of all the layers we have worked with so far. So the thing that I'm going to do now is going to Image, selecting Adjustments, and going down to HDR Toning. It will flatten the document. We have already flattened it, pressing Yes. And now we are ready to start with our HDR Toning. So you have several options here, like Edge Glow, Tone and Detail, and Advanced Settings. First of all, we're working with the Edge Glow. Increasing the radius of the edge glow, it is going to take more edges, more pixels from the image that you're working with. And if I increase the strength, it is going to strengthen the edge glow that you have on the opened image. So it's a little bit depending on the project you're working on, and you can of course play with these sliders here. But I think this is okay for us. Of course, you can smooth the edges of the image, but we don't want to do this. After that, we are switching to Tone and Details. Of course, we can increase the exposure of the image, we can decrease it, work with it, but I think decreasing it a little bit looks more fancy and more vintage style, and that's the result we want to achieve. And maybe increase the details a little bit, but not so much, because if we increase the details, you can see that the image is not so good looking now. So I'm just going to increase it a little bit. After that, switching finally to the advanced options for HDR tuning, you can see shadows, highlights, vibrance, and saturation. So if you want, you can decrease the shadows or increase them depending on the type of project you're working on. In our case, I'm going to decrease the shadows, maybe decrease as well the highlights of the image, but not so much. Let's say this level. And of course, you can increase the vibrance if you want to make it look more like sepia in this case, and you can decrease it if you want to make it look a little bit more like black and white image. But I think if I increase it a little bit, it looks fine. And finally, the saturation, if you decrease it, it is going to get black and white, and if you increase it, it is going to be very sepia. It is going to have a lot of popped up colors, and that's the reason why you should be careful when working with the saturation adjustments. But let's say I'm going to increase them as well a little bit. So you have also preview options. We have it by default selected, and the preset is custom. You have twilight, flat, monochromic, artistic, and other options that you can apply to your image. They are all pre-prepared HDR tuning settings, but for our case, we're going to use custom HDR tuning settings. Pressing OK. And now I think that we have one pretty good looking vintage image that we have achieved from the first image using the dynamic range modifications and adjustments, and also applying some film effects to it, and of course the HDR tuning at the end. Waiting for the image to get processed, and we will find the final look of the image within a few seconds. And now we're ready, and that's the final look of the image. I think it looks very nice, very vintage, and it's a great done job. Why is it important? The increased dynamic range and the film effect help you to make your Photoshop project more dramatic and cinematic In this video, you have learned how to increase the dynamic range in your advanced Photoshop projects and how to set up film effects and, of course, some curves for great-looking dramatic images. It's hardly to say that you are going to use these effects only to create dramatic images, but you can also apply them in order to create the vintage-looking photographies in Photoshop.